Today's Sunday the 18th of March 2018 and Sydney's going for a maximum temperature of 40 today. 40 on the 18th of March. And Penrith 41. So a surge of heat and a surge of wind, and it's been very dry in Victoria. Not all things that you can necessarily directly link to climate change, but you're getting a bit sick of hearing that given the ramp up in severe weather and disasters, because we know there's a connection. And it's just interesting to hear the Australian Treasurer, you know, the sensible guy from the sensible side of politics, just say this, what he's about to say on sensible energy policy, given that Australia's greenhouse gas emissions are going up and have been going up ever since this government came into power, because they're not serious about reducing greenhouse gases. And this goes to the point I was saying about America and Australia being doomed to self-destruct if it was up to them to govern the world. But, you know, right now, as I'm speaking, as Scott Morrison, the Australian Treasurer, is speaking, people's homes are burning down in Victoria in bushfires. I don't quite know. They talk about the disconnect and they talk about being out of touch. I don't quite know how you can say something like this as people's homes are burning down. Just so, like, ignorant of a problem that is a pretty damn serious problem if it's your house that's burning down in a bushfire.
And understand that. Any person who doesn't is Bill Short.
Treasurer Scott Morrison, appreciate your time this morning. Thank you.
Just before I go, David,
yes.
Would you just allow me one thing? Congratulations to Premier-elect Marshall. This is a tremendous win for South Australia. The South Australian election was very much about the economy, and in the same way the Tasmanian Liberal government was returned in Tasmania for their good economic management, in South Australia's Premier Marshall-elect now has been elected because of their trust in Liberals to manage the economy, and I think that's an outstanding result,
well, just one more on that.
To Stephen, and congratulations.
Does it put the federal government one step closer to securing the national energy guarantee that it's been trying to introduce and win the states over on?
Oh, absolutely. And what we'll now have is sensible energy policy in South Australia. That's a very welcome addition to the COAG table, not just having a Liberal Premier around that table and a Liberal Treasurer, but the sensible side of energy policy coming back to the discussion out of South Australia, I think will be most welcome, and we look forward to the contribution that South Australia will be making around that table, not just on that issue, but on many other issues. But for the same reason, Will Hodgman, as an incumbent, was returned for his strong economic management in South Australia. Labor was booted out, and for once we had some fair boundaries in South Australia, which ensured the South Australian people actually could get the government that they voted for.
Scott Morrison, thank you. You heard the Treasurer refer there to this ASEAN special summit that's been underway in Sydney this weekend. It wraps up today. Prime Minister's just been speaking on arrival there. After the break, we'll have a look at that, see what this whole meeting is achieving.
So yeah, it's not common that you see bushfires burning in the middle of March. It can happen, but these are not minor fires, I might just point out. These are big bushfires, out of control bushfires, serious bushfires. And there might be something about it on here. Oh, here's a little bit about the South Australian election.
I say that Stephen Marshall's speech was very weird in that he thanked John Howard before he even mentioned the Prime Minister and didn't mention the Prime Minister by name. So I think he's going to have a few problems too. Oh, and the other very interesting thing is that Cory Bernardi did very badly, and the Libs will love that.
Well, and also you could argue that Nick Xenophon and SA Best did not perform as expected. We could see the past couple of weeks his votes seem to be sliding. Are you surprised, Kerry?
Oh, look, I think it's always the case with these sort of new people who have got based on personalities. Parties that are based on personalities often do very well early on when they announce, because what happens is they announce and people say, oh, I know that person, and I've seen what he's been doing. But then when it gets into a campaign and you start to hear about what they're talking about, then you start people start to wonder, really, is there any real substance there? Can they really do anything?
So you felt it was short on policy substance?
I think what happened was people started to realise that having the Xenophon Party as the balance of power was not necessarily going to be a great thing for South Australia, and particularly when there wasn't, I don't think, a very clear articulation of how he differed from the two big parties, which is what he kept on saying. It was kind of like almost the old Democrat line, we'll keep the bastards honest. Well, been there, done that. They've disappeared. So I just think that he didn't get the attraction which I thought people thought he would get during the campaign.
Stephen Marshall made special point of mentioning Nick Xenophon and saying that the results, he saw it as a clear rejection of Nick Xenophon.
Well, there's a huge difference between winning a slice of the vote, which Nick always did very successfully for the Senate, and actually winning the majority in a constituency. And it's very hard for small parties. And I agreed quite a lot with Rebecca Sharkey on the night, who kept saying, well, it is very hard to win a lower house seat. And might I say that I predicted this result 3 or 4 months ago when Nick Xenophon announced what he was doing. It is very, very hard to win a lower house seat, and the election has proved that.
And it was a big call for him to leave his spot in the federal.
Yes, I don't think we've seen the end of Nick Xenophon. I'm sure he'll be back probably in the Senate.
Now, Meredith, you win some, you lose some. You lost in South Australia, but Labor winning in the by-election for Batman. It was a close-run thing, but, in the end, Jed Carney won through.
Yes, and she did very well. In fact, she even got swings back to Labor in the southern half of the electorate, which was meant to be the sort of hipster area, and that's a very good sign. I think it was a sign that voters really like conviction politics, and Bill Shorten bringing out that quite brave policy about franking credits, refunds, probably did them more good than harm, because it wasn't a quality issue, and I think the Greens made a tactical error by not wholeheartedly supporting it, because they looked like the sort of naysayers, whereas Shorten and the Labor Party looked like the conviction politicians. And I think it has much more ramifications for the Greens, that result, than it does for us, because the Greens are looking at a shocking year next year, because they're going to lose 3 of their senators, because all 6 senators from all 6 states are going up for re-election, and they're not going to win in Queensland, South Australia or New South Wales, and so they'll lose the senators from those states, and it's coming on Tasmania, and a poor result in South Australia. It's going to look very bad.
Kerry, the Greens also blamed the preference deals for the result. Is that fair?
What, because Corey Bernardi was preferencing Labor? I think Bill Shorten should be thanking Corey.
But David Tarley did ask him for those preferences.
Look, I think the Greens can be blaming everybody, and then they will be blaming everybody. But the reality is they had a campaign which was torn apart by internal division, and one of the basic rules in politics, we always say, if you can't govern yourself, you can't govern the country, or in this case, you can't win a seat. So I don't think that helped them. But I actually, and I will take issue with the whole thing about the franking credits issue. I actually think that if had that been announced a couple of weeks earlier, then they might have been able, the Liberal Party may have made a bit more noise about it, and that might have hurt the Labor Party. I actually think that issue is not going to go away, Meredith. I can see that becoming the sort of campaign which the Labor Party ran on Mediscare and how this is going to destroy your life. I can see that there will be a coalition government or a campaign which has got a lot to do with saying to people who are on pensions, who are going to lose substantial amounts of money, for them, $12,000 in some cases, that this is going to really be a difficult part of your life. That is an issue that I have absolutely no doubt will raise its head in the federal campaign.
So you feel that it actually did them some harm at that by-election then?
I don't think, look, to be honest, I don't think there was enough actual understanding of the issue, and when you actually read through the descriptions of how it was all going to work and you read the political commentary, it's quite complicated. But you distill that message to a very simple message of this is going to cost you money, then I think it will become a very effective
Meredith,
political campaign.
do you think Labor will reframe their talk around that tax that Bill Shorten proposed?
Because there is no other way in which you can reduce your income to zero and still get a cash refund. It's only if you happen to own shares that you can get money back. So it is looking at a very small number of people, and the issue has been very clouded by talking about low-income people. They're only low-income because they're not being taxed on their super. In the terms of the way the Liberal Party has talked about this, I'm a low-income person because I'm on a superannuation which is not taxed. I mean, it's been, I think, the longer this debate goes, the more we'll win. But can I also say, and I forgot to say it, Ged Kearney getting elected means that we are now, the Labor Party is now on 48% women
and she's
in the
first ever
Parliament, and the
woman
Liberals are still at 20%.
And
So get on your horse, Kerry, get on your horse.
And let me say, Meredith, I absolutely agree with you, and I am not going to defend those stats at all. So we are on a unity ticket about getting more women in Parliament, let me say.
All right, now we are running out of time, but Meredith, I did want to certainly raise with you the issue of Peter Dutton's comments this past week in regards to the persecution of white South African farmers, saying that he'd like to see the applications for immigration here to be expedited. You have experience in Southern Africa. Certainly, you know this issue well. What did you make of those comments?
Well, I thought he just didn't know what he was talking about because he was referring to a comment by Cyril Ramaphosa, the new president of South Africa, and he didn't understand that there's a long way to go because, first of all, it's got to go through the parliament, it's got to go through all the provinces, it has to be tested in court. And of course, South Africa is very, very different to Zimbabwe. It has a very good constitution. It still has a really working democracy. And in Zimbabwe, what you had was chaos. You had a leader in Mugabe who just sent all his cronies in to take over the white farms, and so it was a chaotic way in which land redistribution took place. The situation in South Africa is that 73% of the arable land is owned by white farmers, and they are 10% of the population. That has to change, and my view is it will be done in a very...
well, I guess it's more the issue of are they being persecuted, assaulted and the like, and Kerry, the Home Affairs Minister was described as racist in this the comments that he was making.
Well, I would always defer to Meredith on her understanding of the African continent. It's much better than mine, but I was actually talking to some South Africans the other day who've got family members who have been raped, and one was shot. And if you ask them, are South African white farmers being persecuted at the moment, the answer is an unequivocal yes. And there seems to be some statistics that support that, with the number of people being murdered on farms. So, how you distinguish that between the issues that Meredith raised and the actual crime rate and, what's going on there. I actually think I think Peter may have, in Meredith's terms, may have overstated the problem, but I think that there is a real issue, and I think we need to look at ways in which people can be allowed to come to this country ahead of them being forced off farms in the very near future.
But if you just look at the crime rate, then it's young black males in the townships that are being murdered, and we should be offering them sanctuary. But, of course, I think Peter Dutton is playing to his own constituency. In Dixon, there are twice as many white South Africans than there are in other parts of Australia, and he is simply... It is racist politics, what he said, especially referring to us as a civilised country, is an appalling thing to say. It's very like what Trump said about, the crap-hole countries in Africa, which got him into such trouble. So I think it was definitely a racist statement.
All right, Meredith.
We'll have to agree to differ.
Meredith and Kerry, thank you so much for coming in this morning. There's a push for jail time for prank callers to 000 after police revealed more than 40,000 nuisance calls were made last year.
Yeah, they included people wanting to order fast food or ask what was on TV. Police say they're putting lives at risk when every second counts.
It's a call no one wants to make when a life is on the line.
And what did she choke on?
Distressingly, just 10% of the calls made to 000 last year were actual emergencies. At least 40,000 were time wasters. 30,000 of those had no voice at all. 11,000 were hoax calls.
You can't help but be angry about this. This is a very important service where seconds matter.
Police data shows one inquired when the TV show Blue Heelers was on. Another asked, what day is it? Ordering pizza or wanting to order a cab were also listed among the prank calls.
What drives people to do this? stupidity.
Police say those nuisance calls divert resources, potentially causing delays for those people calling with legitimate emergencies.
000 is not a fun line. It's not a party line. It is an emergency line.
Last year, 82 people were fined for making 260 prank calls between them. Hoaxes are charged under the Federal Telecommunications Act. The opposition says it's time to start locking them up.
Maybe some of these idiots have got to spend some time in jail to teach a lesson to others not to waste the valuable time of emergency services personnel.
Even genuine callers have been accused of sometimes misusing the service, reporting a noise complaint or even a break-in when they should have called police instead.
Seconds count. Do not misuse 000. It is for emergencies and emergencies only.
Police will roll out an education campaign and have their sights set on serial pranksters. Lexi Hamilton-Smith, ABC News.
Now, the startup sector is expected to contribute $109 billion to the Australian economy by 2033. Australian fashion startups are a major part of the sector, raising billions of dollars in venture capital every year.
For a look at this and other industry news, we're joined now by fashion journalist Paddy Huntington. Paddy, thanks so much for coming in.
Good morning.
No one's very
You know,
interested.
he just left us space for it to be hammered at now, so if I was him, I'd have backed off, I think.
He seems to sway every way he wants to try and get people's opinion to turn on his side.
Well, there you go, some mixed news on the streets of Sydney. Let's bring in Paul Kelly, editor-at-large at the Australian newspaper. We'll get to the specifics around the franking credits move this week, and it was a bold move in the final week of this by-election. But to the results themselves, let's start with Batman. Paul, how important is this win for Bill Shorten?
This was a big win for Bill Shorten. He needed this victory. This was Labor going against the Greens. At the start of this by-election, there was a feeling that the Greens could prevail, and Shorten was audacious here. He put in Jed Carney as the Labor candidate. He committed to this by-election. Then he ran on the Adani mine, very, very critical of the mine. And then, of course, in the last week, we saw Labor's franking credits policy, which I think was a risk. So Shorten had a lot at stake here, and he prevailed. And this is a significant win for Labor in this Melbourne heartland, a heartland which is very pro-green. But Labor showed its credentials here as a progressive party, as a pro-union progressive party, formidable, strong on the ground and able to beat back this Green attack. So for Shorten, it's important.
A few things flow from this in a policy sense in the national debate. Let's tick them off. Adani, right? Bill Shorten did harden up Labor's position. He made it clear he doesn't like the mine and even suggested it doesn't stack up environmentally. What happens now on Adani? Does Labor continue with that harder line?
Well, I think Shorten can't walk away from the tougher position that he adopted on Adani. I mean, he basically said that as far as he's concerned, it doesn't stack up on either environmental or economic terms. Now, the party sent mixed messages about this, and we may see more of those mixed messages, but there's no doubt at all that Shorten has taken a much tougher line, and I think he'll stay with that.
Shorten kept the same line, though, held the line on boats, on asylum seekers. He didn't wobble on that one. Jed Carney clearly has greater concerns. She'll be a voice in the caucus now, perhaps urging for a softer position there, but I doubt there's going to be much movement on that. On the franking credits, though, Paul, let's talk about this. It was a risk. I certainly wasn't sure that it would work for them, but Bill Shorten would be feeling absolutely buoyed by the result. He's got away with an increased margin, no less, in last night's result. So they'll stick with that policy, I assume, but will they still have to soften some of the edges for pensioners?
Well, we'll have to see how this plays out. I mean, as far as Chris Bowen's concerned, he sees this as a long-range issue. And he made the point during the week that there was a lot of hysteria initially when the negative gearing policy was released a couple of years ago. That settled down. Labor won that debate. So I think the message from both Shorten and Bowen will be, settle down, we can win this debate, let's just advance the cause. Now, it's one thing to say that about negative gearing. This is much more difficult because what we're talking about here are the current plans of pensioners and retirees. The current plans, and there's no doubt at all that a number of low-income people, pensioners and retirees are being hurt by this. There's a dispute between the government and the opposition about the numbers, but Chris Bowen acknowledges this fact. So I think this is a very difficult management issue for Labor. This was a bold policy. It's all about Labor building a tremendous war chest for a campaign of redistribution and a very substantial fiscal strategy.
I mean, there's still, I agree, a big risk here because there are a significant number, 230,000 pensioners affected, and you can see from Scott Morrison earlier, the Treasury is going very hard on that front about the pensioners who are affected. Malcolm Turnbull this week will be out in marginal seats. He will be meeting with some of those pensioners. He'll be talking about, the hundreds or thousands of dollars they're losing and what that means to their lives. So you can see the potency of that line of attack. But as you point out, there's a huge war chest this gives Labor. What does that mean now in the tax cut debate leading up to the election?
I think it means three things, David. If you look at what is Labor's long-range election strategy here in terms of this enormous war chest, which is about $210 billion over 10 years, I think they're thinking in three terms. First of all, they want to offer better personal income tax cuts to low and middle income earners than the Turnbull government. So if they can do that, that is a big advantage for them. Secondly, they'll be able to finance their big spending agenda. But thirdly, and don't overlook this, I think Chris Bowen is looking at the budget bottom line. And I think what Chris Bowen would like to do at the next election is to have a tougher budget bottom line over the forward estimates than the Turnbull government. Now, last election, Labor didn't have that. So that's three objectives. Will they have enough revenue to achieve those three objectives? Well, we don't know, but maybe they might, because the size of this war chest is truly enormous. So this is a very ambitious long-range strategy for Labor. The question is whether they've gone too far, whether they've overreached in the short term, whether this policy of cracking down on franking credits will hurt too many pensioners and low-income people. This is a test for Malcolm Turnbull. This is a real test for the Prime Minister.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It makes the budget test in May particularly difficult for them now. I want to turn to South Australia because when we look at both Batman and South Australia, there are some very interesting lessons to learn here about where we're at. The major parties have done well. In Batman for Labor, for the Liberals in South Australia, the minor parties have had a bad night. And let's bring up the statewide vote share. The Nick Xenophon SA Best team, 13.7% of the statewide vote. Sure, that's not a bad statewide figure for your first outing as a party, but elections are all about winning seats, and they may not win a single seat. Nick Xenophon is not going to win the seat of Hartley, so he's gone from leading a crucial balance of power party in the Senate to what? Being nowhere, personally.
Nick Xenophon succumbed to hubris. He spent far too much time listening to what the media was saying about him. He had a commanding position in the Senate. He quit that. He aimed to control the South Australian Parliament via the balance of power. He misjudged that very badly. I think this is a tremendous setback for Nick Xenophon and for the Xenophon party. And I think because he's no longer got that position in either the National Parliament or the South Australian Parliament, it's very hard to see how the Xenophon vote won't further fall away. So I think there's a very major question mark now about Xenophon. The story of the night and the story of recent weeks is the Empire Strikes Back. The major parties, the Liberal Party and the Labor Party, are striking back. The Greens did badly in the Tasmanian state election a couple of weeks ago when the Liberals got back. The Liberals have won in South Australia, just won in South Australia. It looks as though they will be able to form a majority government there. Xenophon did badly, the Greens did badly. Meanwhile, in Batman, Bill Shorten defeated the Greens. So you've got question marks to a certain extent now about both the Xenophon party and also the Greens.
And just on South Australia, finally, Paul, there's also an interesting energy policy discussion. So the 75% renewable energy target that Jay Weatherill championed during the election campaign has been rejected by South Australia. Stephen Marshall comes in promising a different approach to try and tackle power prices. He wants a new interconnector built to New South Wales. We'll see if that happens. But I think most importantly, you've got another state in the federal government's corner in favour of a national energy guarantee. This significant policy change now takes another big step forward.
There are two other very big winners from the South Australian election, and they're Malcolm Turnbull and the Energy Minister Josh Frydenberg. Joey Weatherall, the South Australian Labor Premier, was the strongest national opponent of the Turnbull-Frydenberg National Energy Guarantee policy. Okay? So with the Liberals coming to power in South Australia, I think it's fairly clear now that this Turnbull government policy, driven by the Minister Frydenberg, will in fact get up. I think this will be endorsed. It will become the national policy, and it will give Turnbull a framework now to run on energy. So I think in that sense, this is very significant.
No, it certainly is. So lots to flow from those two elections last night. Paul Kelly, good to talk to you. Thanks
David,
for joining us. Before we go, I'll look at the diary for the week ahead. Tomorrow, Monday, the Senate will be sitting in Canberra, will be sitting for the week. Also, the Banking Royal Commission continues. We've seen plenty of fireworks over the first few days of that commission hearing. On Tuesday, Myanmar's Aung San Suu Kyi is to speak in Sydney. She's, of course, here for that ASEAN summit we were talking about earlier, giving a speech at an event hosted by the Lowy Institute on Tuesday. On Wednesday, the ACTU Secretary Sally McManus will be speaking at the National Press Club in Canberra. On Thursday, Barack Obama, the former US president, is in New Zealand. He's giving a talk at the New Zealand-United States Council in Auckland. And then we've also got some labour force figures, the jobs data out on Thursday as well. On Friday, Barack Obama will be in Sydney. He's giving a speech there. So the Barack Obama tour of this neck of the woods. And then Saturday, finally, for those who travel internationally frequently, Qantas. Its first non-stop Perth to London flight will take place on Saturday. Thanks for your company this morning. We'll be back same time next week. Hope to see you then. Bye for now.
These two teams had the chance to get into the grand final. You might remember even before the AFLW started, these were the two clubs that were the great advertisement for the women's game. So this had put Melbourne in front with about 6.5 minutes.
And now, as part of Westpac's Businesses of Tomorrow program, she can benefit from the help of some of Australia's best business minds. And you can too.
Today, if Adelaide beat Collingwood, they go through. Otherwise, it's the Brisbane Lions. Also, Fremantle earlier beat Carlton yesterday by 11 points. So Carlton finished with the wooden spoon, which is a bit of a surprise given they were one of the pre-season favourites.
All right, so we had that upset in League last night in the A-League.
Yeah.
That's not upset in Sydney.
This was stunning and a bit of a dip in form for Sydney. Was it?
Everything you need.
You know, it's funny, Australians are so obsessed with politics and sport, and there can literally be a bushfire emergency and they're not even really talking about that at all. It's kind of weird when you think about it. Given the thing about the Triple O calls, prank calls to Triple O, yeah, most of the callers are probably teenagers. Quite a few of them are probably 12. Yeah, they need their butts kicking, but are you really going to lock them up in jail? Don't think so.
Home at the Sydney Football Stadium again for almost 2 years. Earlier, Newcastle beat Wellington 1-0, so that means Newcastle are only 5 points behind Sydney with 4 matches to play. So you would think Sydney would still hold on to claim the Premier's plate, but keeping it interesting with a few rounds to go.
Frank, thanks.